Again. Thank you very much indeed. Great to be here. Hi, O'Donovan. My son Kevin Donovan. Again, Joyce.
Very welcome.
And this is Dory.
No, and you're very welcome. Delighted to have you here.
Hello and welcome to the Golden Vale here in the midst of County Limerick. My name is Tim Donovan, or Oscailga Taig O'Donovan, and I would like particularly to welcome my namesake Taig O'Donovan from Cork to his ancestral home. But to deal with the historical end, I would like to hand you over to Monaghan Shaw, who is an authority on the local history of Bruree.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome an O'Donovan here to his ancestral land, two O'Donovans, and you know, it's more or less forgotten. I think that the O'Donovan roots are here now where we stand at the very present moment. It is hardly necessary to say, I suppose, that the territorial divisions in ancient Ireland at the time the O'Donovans were here were very different from what they are now. No counties, no parishes, no baronies. The territorial unit was the Tua, and there were petty kingdoms, and there were about 150 of those in the whole country. And the Tua in the area here, it was along by the Meg, it was on both sides of the River Meg, and it was called Icarbre, and it was actually part of a larger ancient territory called Ifeyente, which split about year 900, and the eastern part of Ifeyente, which was coterminous with the present diocese of Limerick, the eastern part of that ancient territory was Icarbre Efe, or Icarbre for short, and the western part was Ecunnell Gowra, or Ecunnell for short, and that name survives in two barony names in West Limerick to the present day, Conaloe Lower and Conaloe Upper. Well, the O'Donovans, as I say, were here for centuries and were rooted here in pre-Christian times, and the name Donnabhain occurs with a man who was involved in a deed that is still remembered in Irish history, the first Donovan, and the split in Ifigente, which resulted in having a territory called the Carbra here, occurred about the year 900 through internal division of the sept. Now, brewery came into prominence from very early times. The name brewery means literally the residence or the abode of kings, and it was one of the most important sites in Munster. Now, the O'Donovans and their predecessors, their forebears, would have lived, of course, here in the earthen ring forts, of which there are quite a number along the riverbank. The most impressive one is the one here down to our left. We can have a look at it shortly, and it is known as Lis O'Liam, and according to one tradition, that is a corruption of Lis O'Liam, the fort of O'Liam, who was really a mythological king of Munster in the 3rd century. But the O'Donovans would have resided at first in those earthen ring forts. They would have had wooden dwellings on them, and you know, Brewery was quite an important place, and they were sometimes styled kings of Brewery as well as being styled kings of the Carbra. And there is something tourist, an old verse in the Book of Rites, Leor Nagart, Touristal Reeve Rory, Orierin Ganim Neve, Deninner Donna Darga, is Dengwil Gan Gailge. The Donovans or their predecessors would have received that. Touristal Reeve Rory, the stipend of the King of Brewery, Orierin Ganim Neve, from the King of Ireland without regret, De Ninner Donna Darga, 3 red brown mantles, is De Ngil Gan Gailge, and 10 servants without Irish. That meant foreign slaves. So that was the stipend that the O'Donovans received. But here, in the background here, we came down along by that crumbled wall. Now it adheres here to a castle, which I'll have a word to say a little later. But that was a very important part of this structure around here. It was a kind of a D-shaped enclosure with a very high stone wall, and John O'Donovan, who came here in 1840, and other archaeologists were of the opinion that it was obvious from the masonry that it predated the Norman castle, the De Lacy castle, which was built here later. And the belief of O'Donovan and the archaeologists is that it was a very fine cottage. Now, a cottage was a stone fort. It was distinct from the earthen ring forts around. Cottage was a stone fort, and O'Donovan believes that the crumbled walls that we looked at here, they collapsed in 1982 after a heavy rainfall, that they were a very fine pre-Norman cottage, which was later adapted by the Normans. The great Norman family of De Lacy came here. But if O'Donovan is right, and there seems to be no reason to think that he wasn't right in what he said, because people like Westrop and others corroborated and were in agreement with him, the Donovans would have resided here inside those crumbled walls. It was an awful pity they fell. They became the bone wall of the castle. And anyway, in 976, the Donovans, or the chief of the time was Donnabhains. He was the man from whom the name O'Donovan came, and the Vikings were in Limerick at that time, and there was a strong kind of rivalry between the O'Briens. Now, the surnames hadn't come up at that time, but the family that later became O'Briens, and the McCarthys, who were of the O'Nocht dynasty of Munster. Now, that was a scattered kind of a dynasty. There were in different parts of Munster. You had O'Nocht, Lochelaine, Owen in around Killarney. You had O'Nocht, Ratland in southwest Cork. You had O'Nocht, Glanworth, O'Nochaine, Knockcaney, and O'Nocht Cashel. Now, the O'Donovans were not of the O'Nocht, and in early times they had a right every second turn to the kingship of Castle or Munster, but the O'Nocht thought up of a stratagem, and they made out that, or told the O'Nocht they were really, they told the Donovans that they were really of the O'Nocht, and the O'Nocht claimed the kingship for themselves after that. The O'Nocht had it without the O'Donovans. It was a kind of a trick to get them out of the thing. But as I have mentioned, there was a kind of rivalry between the McCarthys and the O'Briens, and what had happened was this: the O'Briens, who were Dalcashans, and they had kind of erupted suddenly into history, and they were very strong. They were in East Clare. Actually, their roots were in East Limerick. They were really Déisi from East Limerick. But Mahan, the son or the brother of Brian Boru, marched to Cashel, and without striking a blow took over Cashel. The O'Nocht had fallen on evil days, and the Dalcashan Mahan was set up as king of Munster. Now, the Donovans, who believed they were O'Nocht, they had the Dalcashans had deposed the O'Nocht. The O'Donovans were very dissatisfied with that. There was also Sept in Cork, O'Mylui, and he was equally disappointed at that and felt aggrieved, and they entered into a kind of conspiracy with the Vikings in Limerick, and against Mahon or Mahone, who was King of Munster, Dalcashan King of Munster, and he was invited to a feast here in Brewery. So Mahon came to Brewery and was feasted for a number of days, and then he set off on a tour of his territory. He set off for southeast Limerick and on towards the passes between the Galties and the Ballahowras. And when he reached a place called Unvarna Yarrog, the Red Gap, or the Gap of Red Chair, they were met by a party of Malloy's men, or Moilou's men, and they fell upon the hapless Mahone. Donovan had provided kind of a bodyguard for Mahone, but he was, of course, had entered into this conspiracy with Moilou. But anyway, to make a long story short, Mahone was killed.
Can I stop you there,
yeah.
Monarchy, and just to, in case all Donovans would be accused of being treacherous murderers, could you maybe place it in context that to some extent the O'Briens were usurpers? I'm not trying to justify anybody's murder,
yeah.
but to give it maybe a broader aspect,
yeah.
there was more to it than just simple murder, wasn't
Well, there was. It was part of the politics of the time, of course. The O'Nocht, the deposed dynasty of Munster, with their allies, the O'Donovans and O'Mylou and others, they looked upon the O'Briens as usurpers who had no right to the kingship of Cashel. So, you know, in the context of the time, it was just a happening that would have occurred in any situation of the similar kind in the country. Now, that was in the year 976 that Mahone was killed. Brian Boru became king afterwards, and of course Brian Boru was the most formidable of the high kings in Ireland as a whole. He was a very able man, and he marched into this territory, gave battle to Donovan, sacked his stronghold, and Donovan was slain. Now the interesting thing is that at Clontarf in 1014, a son of Donovan, of that Donovan who was killed by Brian Boru because of his part in the assassination of Mahone, the son of that Donovan, Cahill, marched to Clontarf with Brian Boru, and O'Donovan still, they had assumed the surname O'Donovan. No, they were still here in Cork, but friction between themselves and the O'Briens, and between the O'Donovans and the McCarthys on the one side and the O'Briens on the other.
Could I ask you there, Mannequin, just to come back again, when Donovan was killed and the O'Briens would have driven them out, my people would always have been County Limerick. I think the first wave we felt went to maybe North Kerry or Mangerton, but Tighe's family would have been Cork, and always Cork. Would I be right in thinking that the first wave maybe went towards Kerry, and 200 years later they went towards Cork, or is that a bit too simplistic?
Maybe it would be. Of course, the time is so far back and the records are sparse enough on the thing, but the received story is that in 1178, Donald Moore O'Brien, King of Thomond, expelled them and a number of other families who had become virtual allies of the McCarthys, and they were driven out of their territories along the River Meigh, and they went into Cork and were settled by McCarthy in southwest Cork. Now, an interesting thing is that they took the name of the old territory here, Carbery, and that's how it got down to West Cork, here, the baronies of Carbery there. So that is a relic, if you like, of the O'Donovans stay here in, of their origins here in County Limerick. Now, it often happened that all the members of a family wouldn't go in the expulsion, and the O'Quillans were expelled as well, the Collinses, and the Collinses are numerous in West Cork. Michael Collins was from there, and still you have a lot of Collinses in West Limerick, showing that all of them didn't go. So I'd say Donovans who may have survived in Limerick were people who weren't in the diaspora to Cork, but the Donovans were replaced by the Lacys, the Norman family, and they had their castle here. You had 3 towers, and they used the Bawn Wall, O'Donovan's Bawn Wall, as part of the structure.
And that's
here.
That's the different stone that we see.
That's the
here.
different stone
and
you
the
can
other is
see.
finer
Yes,
stone.
yeah, and
so that's about how long? How old is that before this?
Well, the castles are probably 14th century.
14th century.
14th
and
century.
This is when that stone wall.
The stone wall was could have been at any time maybe around 1000 or so, you know.
Right. So it would be about 400 years later.
It would be. It would be
when the castle was put in place.
Yes, but
perhaps we can go and have a look at the
river.
lovely river.
Yeah,
and I believe Mannequin
we have a quatrain from O'Hearn. He wrote a topographical poem where he mentions the territory and mentions the Meigh, so it would be appropriate to have a look at the Meigh at that stage.
Right.
So what's the significance of this river?
Well, it's significant in a couple of ways. I suppose the most recent and what would be most familiar to people is its connection with Filina Maw, the Meigh poets in the 18th century, Meigh poets Sean O'Toole and Rhys McCrath and various others. And I think most people who have been to school in the last maybe 60 years have learned to recite or to sing Slán is céad on Dave so oim Cushmá na Gair na Grave na Groch. That's the river on Cushmá. We are beside the Meig River now. Now, it is mentioned in connection with the O'Donovans in a famous topographical poem written about the year 1420 by a poet called Gilla na Neve O'Heareen. And I think his poem opens with the line Trílam Timple na Fola, let us travel round Ireland. And what he does in the poem is he names all the old Gaelic chiefs in their ancient territories, even though many of them would have been supplanted in those territories by 1420 by the Normans. And referring to the O'Donovans, he says, Dúil do Donovan dun Cork on Tírseo in a tear long fuirt. Bolesh gan kies van voig muil is na clawer shees gushinnen. And it has been translated as hereditary to O'Donovan of Dunkirk. Now Dunkirk is a poetic name for brewery. So hereditary to O'Donovan of Dunkirk is this land, a land of encampment. He owned without tribute all the lands along the slow-flowing Meig and the plains down to the Shannon. So that gives you an idea of his territory of Icarbre. It actually extended from the Cork, what is now the Cork border, down along this way, taking in brewery and maybe about 4 or 5 miles wide at this point, onto Croom, onto Adair, and onto the River Shannon, east of Pallaskenry. That was the territory of O'Donovan, and O'Heareen recalls him 150 years after the expulsion, and he says, Dúil do Donovan dun Cork on Tírseo na Tír long fuirt, Bolesh gan kies van voig muil is na clawer shees gushinnen. So that is an interesting little piece to have survived. We get the name and we get the territory described fairly well. In
The Valera, of course, would have had his cottage across here.
There, yes.
Can we actually see it here?
I don't think you would.
Right. But as a boy, he would have played.
Oh, he would have been familiar with this. He knew the people there. People would, and he'd be odd and would punch you, you know, we heard that.
We're not blessed with mountains in County Limerick, but I suppose by short of maybe 10 feet, we have 990 feet of a hill called Knockfearna, and we're now looking at that, and I will ask Mannix to explain the significance of that hill and the fort that we're looking at.
Now, the hill there we can just see on the skyline, Knockfearna, the hill of truth, and it is a hill with very early associations with some of the Celtic gods. The first Celtic god to be associated with it was Lugh Odda. He was the god of all the arts, and there were kind of pilgrimages. The hill was climbed on the Sunday nearest Lunasa, the 1st of August, but Lugh then seems to have slipped out of the picture somewhat, and Knockfearna was associated more and more with Down or Downfearna, the god of the other world or the god of the dead. And the folklorists who came there collected an immense wealth of folklore regarding Downfearna, and I think some commentator described it as the salvage from shipwrecked, what way did she put it, from shipwrecked, just trying to think, you know, what was her rather striking thing, civilizations, I think, the number and the variety of the stories. Lima the Knocker, he'd be brother and the father of Kevin the Knocker, the well-known folklorist, was reared near Knockfearna, and there was an old man dying there and he was taken with his grandmother to see him. And the old man had received the rites of the church, and he looked out the window at Knockfearna, and he said, soon I'll be up there with Down. So he said after 20 centuries of Christian baptism, he still was kind of half between Down, and his beliefs swayed from Down to Christianity. But that is Knockfearna, innumerable tales about it. Now, the ring fort you see here, it's hidden there in the trees. It's a triumvirate. It has triple mounds, triple fosses, and banks surrounding it. It's quite large, very impressive inside, and the name Lis O'Liam is believed to be a corruption of Lis O'Liam, the fort of O'Liam, who was a very well-known person in the mythology of the 2nd or 3rd century. He was supposed to be King of Munster in the 2nd century, and a lot of Munster families claim descent from him. But it is, as I've said, a very strong fort, very impressive. And
could I ask you, Mannix, how he got that name, Olil Olam? Is there a story attached to that?
Olil was a very common name. We won't go into the Olil, but Olam, Olaum, it means bear ear. Laum is bear. O was an old Irish word for ear. And the story is that one Samhain Eve, Samhain was the great Celtic feast, pagan feast, more important even than Belton or Lunas or Imbolc. And it was believed that on Samhain Eve, the dead and the Sidhe, the fairies, came out from their mounds, and there was a very famous mound east of here. How many miles? Might be about 12 miles or so. Cnocania, Knockeny, and O'Liam, he was on just simply O'Liam that time. He went there, and when the doors of the Sidhe, which was the residence of the fairies, opened, he burst in and he met Anya, and he attacked Anya. He slew her father, who went to her rescue. He ravaged Anya, but she bit off his ear, and ever afterwards he was known as O'Liam Olam.
I would have to at this stage interject and say, of course, that is a fairy story. It's bad enough to have ancestors who were murderers, but now to have one who was possibly a rapist is just beyond belief.
Yeah.
None of the Donovans that I knew were a bit like that.
Were a bit like that, indeed, and indeed. Yes, but, you know, it was a very strong force, and I've no doubt that the O'Donovan family, or the family that was to take the name O'Donovan, that royal family of Icarbra, must have occupied that at some stage. So here are the beginnings, here are the footprints, the earliest footprints of the O'Donovans, here on the banks of the River Meigh, along this rich territory which was on both sides of the River Meigh here in County Limerick.
It was a namesake of Dr. Mannequin Joyce's, who discovered many years ago a tune that is very familiar to all Donovans, and now that we have a website, it is the title of our clan newsletter, and basically it is the Eagle's Whistle. And perhaps, Mannequin, you would fill in about the area around Glenorsheen where it was all discovered?
Yes. Well, Glenorsheen is situated in the foothills of the Ballahora Mountains, a very picturesque little place. The name, of course, means Glen Vosheen, Gleon Sheen, and it is mentioned a number of times in the Fíneocht, the literature about Finn McCool and the Fianna. And it's interesting for another reason too, that sometime about the year 1740, a settlement of Germans, Palatines from the Rhenish Palatinate, were settled there. And also interesting for the fact that P.W. Joyce, Patrick W. Joyce, and his family lived there. The house is now marked with a plaque. P.W. Joyce was one of the outstanding characters and scholars of the late, well, from the mid-18th century on. He laboured very successfully in many fields. He's best remembered, I suppose, as the pioneer in the study of Irish place names, being the author of the 3-volume history of origin, they called The Origin and History of Irish Place Names. He also wrote quite a number of histories of Ireland. In fact, he wrote the very first popular histories of Ireland. His famous book, A Child's History of Ireland, beautifully illustrated, was the first history book that got into the hands of Irish children in Irish schools. He wrote a social history of Ireland, a history of Gaelic Ireland, and various others. He also translated some of the great tales from the Rúiríocht, the Red Branch cycle, and from the Fíneocht, the Fíne cycle, in a book called Old Celtic Romances. And his third field of endeavour was the collection and publication of Irish music. He published, I think, 4 collections of Irish music, most of them never published before, and he remains with Petrie and O'Neill and others, one of the great collectors of traditional Irish music. His home place, Glenasheen, was a great home of traditional music, he said, and song. He said you heard them everywhere, sung, people at work sung out in the fields and so on, and visiting people, maybe people on the road who would be travelling people, would be kept for a night in houses, and they would bring along maybe songs or music that they hadn't heard in Glenasheen, and these would be accepted into the repertoire of Glenasheen. And he made out anyway that he had assembled an immense collection of song and music, much of it from his native place, and he published all those and very graciously named the people who had given them, gave wonderful accounts, fascinating accounts of the circumstances in which he collected them. He tells of one song called On Clorbug Dale, and he said they were out one day footing turf in the bog at the back of Sea Fen Mountain, and dinner time came, he said, and the clean white cloths were spread on the dry bank surface, and they had roast herrings and boiling hot potatoes, and blawhook, which was skim milk, slightly and pleasantly sour. And he said they had this meal, a meal fit for a hungry king. And then there was a bit of diversion among the youngsters, and finally somebody asked Peggy Moynihan for a song, and he said Peggy was a beautiful singer, and down she sat willingly on a turf bank, and she gave us on Clorbug Dale in Irish with intense passion, while all around listened, including myself and my little brother Robert. We listened mute and spellbound. So that gives you an idea of the kind of man he was and his love for the music. So anyway, he was the man who collected and preserved in one of his collections the Eagle's Whistle, the anthem of the O'Donovans.
Now, to have the lovely Eagle's Whistle tune for you that Monaghan was explaining, we have a son of mine, Kevin Donovan, who will now play for you the traditional tune of his ancestors in Bruree. man, Kevin. Well done. Great stuff.
Well, here now is the De Valera cottage, built in 1882. And De Valera himself, he was born, of course, in New York, and he was brought to Ireland by an uncle to be reared here in the cottage by his grandmother and another uncle, Patrick. And he arrived here in April 1885 at the age of 2.5. Here he spent all his youth, went to school to Brewery, and as I say, grew up with his grandmother and his uncle. He heard her speak Irish, first time he heard anybody speak Irish, and from this humble cottage went out a man who was later to become head of an Irish government, who was to become a leader in the 1916 Rising, who was to chair a meeting of the League of Nations, who was to become head of government for quite a number of years, and who was twice President of Ireland. From this humble cottage he came out and achieved all those distinctions.
We have now left the lovely County Limerick and we have journeyed into Cork, and I'm delighted to say hello here to Jack Mom, a local historian who has poetry and yarns, and we're here beside this lovely old lifting stone which young men in years gone by would lift to prove their manhood. Jack told me he did it most times before breakfast. So over to you now, Jack.
Well, indeed, I did, whatever I didn't go breaking. If all the girls in the world lift me down, I didn't go breaking my back over him. But talking of stones, there are lots of stones around Barnadarragh, you know. And it went like this, a bit of a verse I made about it, you know. Those stones of are the pyramids of Egypt at awe-inspiring sight. Recall that those ancient monarchs, they recall the ancient pharaohs, those monarchs of renown. And each stone in Barnadarragh commemorates some battle, but mundane people think they are with scratching stones for cattle. Of all the stones in Fairer Chair, I'll concentrate on two, concerning nobleman and his brother Windrow. Here in Barnadarragh, this fertile Hora Pass, was slain the nobleman that here all Dalcast. Overlooking Barnadarragh in Knockbrone's sunny shoulder is the lonely grave of man, marked by a limestone boulder. And to the north of Cork, Copying, where the sunbeams ever lie, is the grave of his assassin, the treacherous Valera. So Brian, he came to Hora, vowing vengeance for his brother, and before his stalwart warriors, his enemies did shudder, and the swords of the Dalcassan, the Greens, saw they did stain, with the blood of treacherous natives and many a plundering Dane. And Murrah, my youthful warrior, brother of Brian Barrow, on the very spot where Mahan died, his uncle's slayer he slew. They erected clocken numerous that bloodstained spot, so that Borra, Brian and Mahan would never be forgot. And the history books they tell us that Brian became Ardrey and showed the world at famed Clontarf how Aaron could be free. That was a short account of, but I didn't, somehow I was a little bit lenient on the O'Donovans.
No, don't whitewash them at all. I would say
they were
a bad lot.
Well, they weren't turned altogether their fault, no, and didn't because I'm talking so, because...
would you say the O'Briens were the usurpers?
According to my historical Jeffrey Keating, and he was fairly knew what he was talking about. He was a Munster. You had several petty kings in Munster. You had, you had the O'Keefes here in the county, O'Keefe, and you had the McCorricks, McCarthy out in Tipperary, in the noted place, Castle. And then we had the O'Sullivan Bears back in West Cork, and we had down in Brewery, we had the O'Donovans, and I don't know about the Malloys. Were they only sort of parasites of the Donovans, like, had that, because you had to be, for the time that you had to be well-bred, like, and you would never become a king of Munster or a king, except you were able to go back to Ulliel Olaf and own more racing. So that would make you eligible to be king of Munster.
Right.
So,
but you think we redeemed ourselves to some extent with Diarmid O'Donovan Rossa?
Yeah, I've said that. But somehow, again, Brian Barrow was lucky the way things went with him, because he was a usurper. He was like a young cuckoo throwing the other little bird out of the nest. That he was fine, like when he mustered all the Munster was to fight keep out the Leinster men. But when he was by himself, and he didn't bother much to keep out the Danes. He fraternized with the Danes very much, so. But then, when the and he wouldn't give any order, it should have gone around to different ones to be. It should be the O'Donovans one term, so like they nowadays like that. It would vary from one to the other. He wanted it all for himself, and he lived across the Shannon, of course, and he was a very independent. But they had Fred, and at the time Mahan was died. He was king. He was the king of Munster at Castle.
And was that the time that the Donovans were drove down to the west Cork?
Apparently it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what time was that?
Yeah, no, he was. Their chief was killed here.
Yeah.
He was killed. Or, that's the story goes that.
And would you ever have heard of the tune "The Eagle's Whistle"?
No.
Or would you have ever known any Donovans living about this area at all?
Sure, we had in fact, sort of my son-in-law is Donovan, no?
All right.
But he came from County Limerick, actually.
Right.
Yeah. But that was, but, Brian Barrow, what made a great hero of him then, when things went right for him, like. But when he was around here, getting onto the Danes, he was out. He wasn't to get onto the right fact of it. To the luckiest thing for him that ever happened, that Mahan was killed, because he'd be only a legger with Mahan. Well, but when he was dead, he stepped in. When Mahan died, he stepped in as to be the head man. Yeah. But this was the way.
That'll bring us to the next stage now, where we'll take the trip down towards Maherton.
Mangerton.
Yeah.
And we'll be looking at the, if you like, the fleeing of the Donovans, if you like, down to that quarter, down to West Cork.
I know, but it was then they abandoned. Well, when their chief, I suppose they were demoralized. There were 1,200 between Danes and natives. There were, yes, that was it. And yes, then, yes, it was 2 years after Brian came, and the Battle of was fought here. 1,200 were slain there. And I ploughed lots of the field, and I never found as much as a shin bone.
Okay, will we close it there now?
That's great, that's great.
Yeah.
Is there anything else worthwhile seeing in this area, Jack?
No, but it's all closed in with hedges up there. We'll want to look at clucking them, right? Yeah.
Can we see it from the road?
Well, look, I was more than surprised. Our hedges have all grown since I...
We'll leave it there.
Inside the ditches.
Yes, yes.
We're kind of cut for time. We'll be in Rathkeel for 7.
Oh, yeah.
Now back in my native Rathkeel, and before we sign off and send you on your way, I've a few items that I think you might be interested in seeing. This is a painting of Diarmuid O'Donovan Rossa, the most extraordinary Rosscarbery man, married 3 times, 18 children, many years a Fenian, many years in prison, a most extraordinary man who fought long and hard for our freedom. And that's one famous Donovan. This second painting by Jack Donovan, again, is the death of Mahon. And Mahon is being slaughtered, as you can see, by all sorts of people. They claim the Donovans had something to do with it. This is a timber replica made in ash and in yew and black ebony, made by a local craftsman for the son of Peg Donovan, who lived in Grouse Lodge, where my people come from, and we gave him a present of it because it is an item that is associated with the Donovans. This is a more modern replica of it, produced in Mullingar. It's in pewter, and this is in fact one of the prizes in the Donovan raffle that's going on with the clan gathering. The reason the interest is here in the Arda Chalice is we've had somebody from the museum who talked about the time it was discovered and suggested that maybe at the time it was hidden, that in fact it was a chalice that would have been owned by Donovan, who was the king of the Efi Yenta at that time. It's maybe stretching it to say it's a Donovan heirloom, but we're claiming it anyway. The second item we have is the souvenir program of Diarmuid O'Donovan Rossa at the time when a plaque to his memory was laid in Stephen's Green. At that time, 50 years ago roughly, Sean T was president, and 2 of the daughters of O'Donovan Rossa were flown home from New York, and these are their signatures. It's a priceless item costing 1 shilling, and that will be on display in Castle Donovan Schoolhouse. The last item I have to show you is a terrible instrument of war. This is roughly an 8-foot pike, a replica of this was used in 1798, and a dreadful piece of equipment it is, of course, as it is now, unsharpened, but at the time it was used it would have been very sharp here, and the purpose of this would have been to drag the horse's bridle down, and it was used in that fashion. The reason I have it is because my wife comes from Wexford, and there is a forge still making these 200 years later. And the reason that I particularly am interested in it is that probably the first casualty in the Wexford Rising was John Donovan, who unfortunately was slain and dragged from his horse, probably by his cousin Tom Donovan of Boulevard. And sadly, the said Tom Donovan was killed a couple of days later at the Battle of Owlet Hill. All of which leads us on to say that the modern day commemoration in Wexford thankfully has got rid of all that, in that the emphasis now is on the original ideals of the United Irishmen, which was Catholic, Protestant and Dissenter being united in one. And that's the way I would prefer to remember these dreadful pikes of other days.
Hello, gentlemen.
How are you doing?
Sean, how are you? Good to see you again.
Not bad, not bad.
How's that? Fine.
Okay, here we are in Castle Donovan, and as you can see in the foreground we have the castle. And I'd like to introduce Sean O'Brien from Galans.
Thank you very much.
And Sean, what's the history that you're aware of here of this castle?
Well, of course, if you want to talk about the history of the O'Donovans versus the history of the castle, the O'Donovans go back a long way. As a matter of fact, themselves and the O'Briens spring from the same root. But as a matter of interest, I see now two brothers. Yes, a fellow named Derek, he was the 11th in line from Olliel Ullum. He had two sons, Lonan and Kinfela. Kinfela was chief of the Figente in Limerick, where the O'Donovans originated. He was contemporary with St. Patrick, whom he entertained in the year 439 in his palace in the Hill of Array in County Limerick. This is noted in the Tripartite Life of St. Patrick, which was translated by Professor Colgan. I mentioned that as an interesting item, which I am quite sure all the O'Donovans would be interested in. We go down, I mean, there's a list of names of chieftains of the O'Donovans. They were not, by the way, O'Donovans at the time. It wasn't until the late 900s, the early 1000s, that surnames were beginning to be introduced. There is a note here, the 23rd in line was Cahill, chief of the Figente. He was slain by the celebrated Callahan of Cashel, king of Munster. He had two sons, one of them died in 964, so we're coming down to moderately modern times. And the second son was Donovan, after whose name the O'Donovans are named. There was always bad blood between the O'Donovans and the O'Briens, but this is another story altogether. The trouble was that Donovan, being an Ontuck, and the O'Briens being Dalcashans, did not agree over the kingship of Munster. So, as I said, there was bad blood. Without going into details, we'll leave it at that. The O'Donovans, however, were beaten several times. Finally, in County Limerick, when O'Donovan joined in with the Danes and murdered Brian Boru's brother, and Brian exacted vengeance, and in the process killed Donovan and killed the other fellow, Molly, from West Cork. Moyle Moo was his name, and having said that, displayed a certain amount of diplomacy by marrying his daughter to Molly's son, Cian, and he was the originator of the O'Mahanis. And indeed the Cian, the Christian name Cian, is still a very popular Christian name in the O'Mahanis. As a matter of fact, if I be forgiven for bringing in a personal note, my youngest grandson is named Cian O'Mahony. So that name is in existence with many, many years.
Right, very historic.
In the year 1201, the chief of the O'Donovan, Olive, was seated in the county of Cork, where he was slain that year by the O'Briens and the De Burgos. But how he stood related to the chief is not known. To regress a little bit, Brian Boru was a diplomat. There's no doubt about that. He married his daughter to Cian O'Mahony, and by that married the O'Mahanys in with the O'Briens. He then made friends somehow or other with the O'Donovans. That I don't know how. But at the Battle of Clontarf, where Brian was killed, Cian O'Mahony commanded the forces of southwest Munster, and Donovan, Cathal O'Donovan, he is described in the annals as Rí Carbre, the king of Carbery. The original Carbery, of course, was in County Limerick. Rí Carbre fought under Cian O'Mahony at Clontarf, and therefore fought under Brian Boru. So they were good friends at the end of the day.
Good.
And even Cathal O'Donovan's son was killed at Clontarf. However, when Brian was killed, I'm afraid the whole thing went into the melting pot again.
Okay.
Everybody, the O'Briens, the O'Mahonys, the O'Donovans, the McCarthys, to use an agricultural expression, they were all driving their own bull to the fair.
Right.
However, to get down to the O'Donovans again, there's a note by the Most Reverend Dr. O'Brien, Bishop of Clyne, in his History of the O'Briens, a book which I have not yet succeeded in acquiring, and he says, Donald O'Brien greatly distressed all the Eugenians, he was the Onthuks, as versus to the Cashans, and obliged all the dispersed to seek for shelter in the woods and fastnesses of Iach. Now Iach was the ancient name of the territory we're standing in. Well, where we are standing was in Iach, or is in what was Iach territory.
And what kind of area, land area, did it take in with the castle?
Well, you could say West Cork.
Right.
More than what is now known as West Cork.
Right.
It went nearly as far as Ballincollig.
Oh,
very
right.
nearly.
A very large geographical area.
Yes.
So.
But when he says that Donald O'Brien greatly distressed all the Eugenians, that is the understatement to my mind of the year. Because he goes on to say, in this expedition, they routed the O'Donovans of Ifiginte in the county of Limerick, and the O'Collinses of Econalgora, or Lord Conallow in the said county, beyond the mountains of Mangerton, to the western parts of the county of Cork. Here these two exiled families, being powerfully assisted by the O'Mahonys, made new settlements for themselves in the ancient properties, and those are the three names that I couldn't think of when I was talking to you the other day, the O'Donoghus, O'Learys and O'Driscolls, to which three families they were always declared enemies. So, yeah, Cathal, it would be then about 1200 that the O'Donovans arrived in this area. According to the annals of Innisfallen, one of the O'Donovans, Crom O'Donovan, was killed in the year 1254 at a place called Inishan Vale, now known as Fale, near Inniskeen in the county of Cork, by O'Mahony's people. Incidentally, the name Inniskeen is derived from the name Cian, the first Cian I was talking about, Inish Cane.
Yeah.
And the name still exists, as you know, in the village of Inniskeen. And the note says this crown was the ancestor of all the septs of the O'Donovan family in the baronies of Carbery in the county of Cork, and of several others in Leinster, about which I don't know anything. Cahill was the first son of Crom, and he gave his name to the territory of Clan Cahill in the county of Cork, where we are now standing. And this is defined by an inquisition taken at Cork on the 6th of October 1607, as containing 67 plough lands, and extending from the sea on the south to the river of Mealach on the north, and bounded on the north with the lands of Clan Donal Roe, the lands of Clan Screema, and with the lands of Clan Lachlan in the east, and the lands of Clan Dermody and Clan Tigrevo on the west. All these names, of course, now no longer they're no longer relevant to the area, but except the River Mealach.
Yeah.
The River Mealach runs at the bottom of my land. You were at my place.
I was indeed, yeah.
The Mealach runs and go into the sea at Donnabhains.
Right.
That was the northern boundary. The Inquisition also states that it contained two manors, the manor of Castle O'Donovan, containing 21 plough lands, and the manor of Rahid. Now this was taken by, in when? 1607, that would be in Carews' time, after the Battle of Kinsale. Randall O'Donovan succeeded this man, and according to MacFirbish, he had a son Dermot, the ancestor of all the subsequent chiefs of the O'Donovans. Collins gives him this fellow Collins was a great historian, gives him a second son Thibaud, the ancestor of a sept of the O'Donovans called Schlucht Thibaud, who possessed a tract of land near Skibbereen, where they built the castle of Gotnagloch, the ruins of which are shown on the ordnance map in the parish of Craich, near Skibbereen. Then there was Dermot and Tig, and Donal O'Donovan, known as Donal na Grican, Donal of the Skins. Now, why he was called that, I don't know. It is possible that maybe he was dressing his soldiers or his men in untanned hides or something like that. I'm not sure, which was common enough at the time.
Okay.
He was the fellow who built the present Castle Donal, but some parts of it are reputed to be older. And this is interesting. He was inaugurated chief of Clan Cahill by McCarthy Riach about the year 1560. And this is very interesting. He was fostered by O'Leary. And O'Leary is one of the clans which the O'Donovans superseded in this area, so they must have ironed out their differences. He was fostered by O'Leary at his castle of Carrignacurra, now called Castlebarters, in Shigila. He was married to Ellen, the daughter of O'Leary, at the church of Drumalee. Now that sounds like Drumalee, whether it is or not, I don't know.
Sounds
the
like
church of Drumalee. After having had by her Dermot O'Donovan and other sons, who were declared bastards by the Lord Chancellor Adam Loftus in 1592. He had also Donal and Tig born after his marriage according to the rites of the Holy Church. This would be the Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
His eldest son, Dermot, was killed at a place called Lochna Knob in 1581 by Donal Cone. Now this is the fella, this is the Dermot O'Sullivan about whom the story is told.
Right.
About which I was talking to the other day.
So will we get, this is a Barna Fulla.
Barna Fulla.
Barna
yes.
Fulla. So maybe if we can
as a matter of interest,
head up there and perhaps have an overview of the castle from that point where the, and what does Barna Fulla mean?
Oh, the gap of the blood.
Gap of the blood.
The gap of the blood. The bloody gap.
Okay.
It seems that, well, of course, cattle raiding was a pastime at the time, and it seems that the O'Donovans raided into O'Sullivan's territory and were bringing a certain amount of cattle home to Castle Donovan.
And what time period is this again now?
Well, Donald Combe lived in the late 1500s, early 1600s.
So this cattle rustling is happening in the
yes,
1500s?
Yes, yeah. Oh, well, I'd say it was happening for hundreds of years. You know.
This particular
it was a means of relaxation, I'd say. There was nothing, you know...
Much like fox hunting today.
No terrible enmity involved in the thing. Then maybe if some fella had spare time in his hands, he'd say to gang, come on, we'll go over the hill and we'll raid Sullivan's place.
Okay.
Yeah. As
Will we call it there now?
Well, whatever you like.
Yeah, just for the moment. Okay.
Sean, what are the animal benefit here, or is it only here talk, or
well, to an extent anyway, it is hearsay. As I already mentioned, it is an historical fact that this man Dermot O'Donovan was killed at Lochnadob by this famous Donald Clan. But apparently the story is that they were cattle raiding, and of course cattle raiding was a kind of a pastime at the time. There was no bad blood in it or anything like that, even though a little bit of blood would be spilt now and again. But apparently they were coming from the O'Sullivan country, which is just on the other side of the river Mealach, over the hill, with a prey of cattle, and the O'Sullivans overtook him here at this pass of Barnafalla, and there was some little bit of a row, and maybe somebody got his nose punched or something like that. Whatever amount of blood was spilt there, I don't know, but it's still known as Barnafalla. So the O'Sullivans apparently got back their prey at the time, but in this Dermot O'Donovan again decided he'd go on a raid into the O'Sullivan country, and his wife apparently had a premonition that something bad was going to happen, and she implored him not to go. But he said, don't worry, he said, my hand will be on the gate before midnight. And he raided down, they were raided down as far as Adergall, it seems. And Donald Combe, apparently, the famous Donald Combe, who fought at Kinsale and all the rest of it, and done the famous retreat to the north, was a very lazy young lad, and apparently the mother came in fighting. And she said, it's more than that, I go on, so she the cusses was all and Crachafag and Bear. Tis an almighty shame for a Donald which are tossing the ashes and the plunder leaving there. Anyway, Donald got his back up, collected men, followed the O'Donovans, overtook them at Derrycreagh. And Derrycreagh now means the oak wood of the plunder. And they told Dermot, this is the last year reaving now, you know. So he said, you wouldn't have a man to break his word to his wife. And they said, what promise did you make? He said, I promised my wife my hand would be on the castle gate before midnight. And they said, we'll redeem your promise. And they hanged him there, cut off his hand, and sent one of their fastest runners to Castle Donovan that night, and had the hand hanging in the gate before midnight. And there is still somewhere up in that area an oak tree known as Derricky in Diarmid's oak tree. Now, I have no documentary evidence to prove this. It is hearsay. It was listed in the Capuchin Annual by a fellow named A.D. Vlacom years and years ago. I still have a copy of the annual. And what it does, it puts meat on the bones of history. That's what all can be said about it.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Right, Sean. Thanks, Sean. Well, now, this is the plaque that will be opened, will be unveiled on next Sunday by Minister Chile de Valera, and hopefully the day is fine and everything will go well. And it was propped there during the week. So now I'll ask Sean if he has anything else to add to what he already said.
We do not want to be too long-winded, you know, but anyway, Donald O'Donovan succeeded his father on the 15th of February 1639. And it was during this man's chieftaincy that the castle was attacked by Cromwell's soldiers. But the garrison, having run out of ammunition, escaped to Limerick. The castle, needless to say, was being held for the king and was forfeited in 1641. Another Donald O'Donovan, the first Donald's son, on the death of his father in 1660, being left without any estates, he petitioned His Majesty Charles II immediately in his restoration, also in 1660, to restore him to his father's property. Well, he must have been kept hanging on for a long time by Charles, because Charles, in the 18th year of his reign, granted the lands of Castle Donovan, Seahorn, etc., containing 2,373 acres unto Lieutenant Nathaniel Ebenson at a rent of £22.411. After that, and I have a note here, so much for loyalty to an English king. But after that, as far as I know, the O'Donovans of Castle Donovan ceased to be landed gentry, except, and most of the rest of the family did too, except those who conformed to the established church.
John Joe, what's the history of this mound?
Well, the only history I have anyway is that this was here long before the castle was built. And certain times of the year, the chieftain of the O'Donovans, you speak from the top of this and make the law above the law of the clan and all to that. And the evening then, it was in evening hunting, as you can see all around you there. There was plenty of view for hunting, and that's the meaning of this as far as I know. So that's all history I have of this, like.
And it's known as?
The O'Donovan Mount.
Yeah. The O'Donovan Mount,
yeah,
or the seat?
The seat of the O'Donovans, if you want to put it like that,
right.
yeah.
The seat of the O'Donovans.
That's right. So there were steps up there from the back.
Dan, what's this man's picture now? What's that about?
He's the famous Danny Rick.
He's the captain of
He was the captain of the Donny team that went to Dublin. I don't know how many years ago, I think it's there on the back, but I can't see it anyway. But he would be the owner here, he'd be the man that owns it now, he'd be his grandfather.
That man would be his grandfather.
And this man here would be his great-grandfather. This man here is this man's father.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have 3 generations there.
So you have 3 generations associated here in Dunmanway.
Or I'd say probably before that.
Even before
that it was mentioned.
Right.
You see, there was one time they were evicted from Carliheen, and they settled here below in the bar down by Neil's, and they moved from there to here.
Very good.
So that's the record we have of them.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. What's the importance of this graveyard in Dunmanway?
It's a very old cemetery. It's supposed to be the 2nd oldest in Ireland. And, you know, and the O'Donovans are being buried here since they came from Limerick, before the new cemeteries were opened.
Right. How old would this cemetery date back to?
I'd say we're burying there about 830 years.
Right, so there's graves to that distance
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, just as we're here, there's mention of pet names behind the O'Donovan, like O'Donovan Bard, I've heard that.
Yeah, I'm O'Donovan Bard.
Right. What's the significance of that expression in the name?
It seems they had a fleet outside Landownership, a fishing fleet, and that they also built boats.
And are there other O'Donovans with other names behind their surname?
They are, yeah, O'Donovan Goleen.
O'Donovan Goleen.
Yeah.
And what's this, do you know the background to that name?
They seem to think that some of them seem to think that they were great goalies.
Goalkeepers. Stop the ball.
Yeah. And then other people said that they came from Goleen.
Right. Well, Sam McGuire, I'd like to hear that. All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, any other names of significance with that?
Ricks. Yeah.
What's O'Donovan Rick?
Yeah.
And what would that have meant?
I don't know what that would have meant, really. And there was a family up here. They're gone out of it now, though. They'd be called Blackstaff.
Blackstaff, I've heard that now. And what?
Yeah, but I read where that was anglicised, that Balcash was the proper fluent speakers.
Yeah, fluent speakers, I've heard that now, because there's O'Donovan Blackstaff in Kilcrohan, isn't there?
There is, yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard of that gentleman. Dan, the area here, what's this graveyard? You said it's in relation to the old Dunmanway town.
Yeah,
or what was it then known as?
Before Dunmanway was ever heard of, there was a village just beyond the trees there. I think if you look there, you'll probably find the ruins there. You could see the stones there. That was probably one of the first settlements that came there before the Dunmanway town ever came about.
So it's likely that the O'Donovans that fled down here lived in
well,
that
we don't know.
vicinity.
We don't actually know if there's the O'Donovans put it there, but it was there. You
They
know,
would have lived there anyway.
More than likely.
Yeah. The it's as we saw from the notices coming in here. This is a famine graveyard.
It is, yeah.
Well, the famine was there was an old cross just beyond the one you can see there, okay?
Right.
There was a big timber cross there, and it was there all the people of the famine were buried. There's only just, there was no plaque to them, no nothing, only just a timber cross when I was a young fellow growing up.
And is there any idea what size, what numbers of people?
Oh, we wouldn't.
They were very big numbers.
There was big numbers. There was actually bring them in there with a horse and cart.
There was a union, there was a Dunmanway union up here, a hospital, and they were feeding him there with the yellow meal.
Yeah, like maize meal.
Maize meal, yeah. And the local magistrate, I suppose, will be killed. He was calling and asked the clerk how many did today. He would say so many. Oh, very good, give it 'em 10 and hot.
Oh. That's what the way they got it too.
Yeah.
It's a pity, really,
were
because
sad times really for people.
My great-grandfather took part in burying a lot of the famine victims, because he, like Rossa, he never got the fever.
Funny enough.
No.
So strange.
No. And he also fished winter and summer, and he fed the people. They must be after him
for the fish.
Yeah, and I heard my father saying, he was his grandfather, that they eat him raw.
They were that hungry.
Yeah, some of them.
Yeah.
And I believe it because the families down along, they were notorious fishermen.
Very good. Okay. Thanks.
I thought I'd have that scene.
And is this graveyard still being used today?
Yes, it is.
I said the last one to go in there, I think she was Mrs. McCarthy. As far as I know, Johnny Manny, they went in within a couple of...
Jerry's gone in with a month.
Yeah, and it was Mrs. McCarthy, Kevin's mother.
Well, Dennis, what's the importance of this grave here, this old one that we're looking at?
The importance of that is that all my old ancestors are buried there.
So you say this was built about 800 years ago?
Yes, when they came back, they came here from Limerick.
Right. But has there been additional work done to it in the meantime?
It was renovated. It was built with stone, but it was plastered in with concrete in 1936.
And that's the date there?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. There was a piece there above in And I noticed that in memory of the O'Donovan Bard family was on that.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, and then when tomb burials ceased, they gave them a plot here outside.
Oh.
From the old wall of the old church over here.
What is that stone?
Like rocks against the tidal wave, those gallant rebels stand. But the Saxons soon outnumbered them, reinforcements were at hand. But alas, regardless of his life, brave Tig faced lead and hill. He died to save our motherland that day at Shannonville. Let us honour now the place he fell, likewise the Cralpy's grave. Our slogan breaks the tyrant's chains, no more we will be slaves.
Well, we're here now in Shannonvale, and Trail O'Donovan is going to explain the significance of this location.
Well, muinterí Donovan agus Cardélig, Trail O'Donovans and Donovans. I'm chairman at the moment of the Clonakilty Historical Society, coming Shannachas Clocknaquilcha, and it's a great. I'm a member of the O'Donovan Rua set, and it's a great honour for me to discuss the history of a famous clan member, Tig O'Donovan Asna, and his place in Irish history. Little known outside of the local area, but of great importance here and what he did in 1798. Now, Tig O'Donovan Asna was born in the tail end of Lachanaluha, which is a couple of miles east of the road here, near Darra, an ordinary farmer's son. In 1798, tradition has it, he was about 30 years of age. He led a force of 400 men with pikes against the British militia on the morning of 19th of June 1798, and he ambushed them at this spot here. Now, the Westmeath militia were garrisoned in Clonakilty. They were the British forces at the time. There were many Catholics in their ranks. There was a question about their loyalty because they were badly treated by their officers, and there was a theory at the time that many of them, with a little bit of prompting, would actually mutiny and transfer to the United Irishmen. So the British Army got word of this, the British government got word of it, and they decided to replace them with a more loyal legion to King George, the Caithness Legion, who were stationed in Bandon. So on the night of the 18th of June, word came to Clonakilty for the Westmeath militia to move out the following morning on the 19th. Tig and his followers got word of it. They ambushed them here at this point. They felt that maybe if they approached them in force, that many would surrender. But in actual fact, Tig was shot very early on in the contest, and a lot of the steam was taken out of the battle, so to speak. But they were getting the upper hand when, unfortunately for them, the Caithness Legion, who were on their way here from, this was the main road to Clonakilty at the time, from Bandon, through the village of Ballinascarty, down to Shannonvale and into Clonakilty. Now, the Westmeath militia came from Clonakilty this way, through Shannonvale, were ambushed here at this cross. The Caithness Legion were coming this way from Ballinascarty, heard the noise of the battle, and of course got involved, and they had cannon, they had musketry, and of course the United Irishmen were routed very quickly. Now, Tig and Asna, the last anim Asna, we have two derivations for it. One, Usna, which is the Sai, and the other could be osna of the rib cage or of the extra rib. It's one of the two. There are 20. I have up to in the recent journal that was published on behalf of the O'Donovan Clan. I think they have something like 40 las animaca or nicknames for the various O'Donovans mentioned in that booklet. But Tadhg O'Donovan himself was not a leader of the United Irishmen around the area here. People like Dr. Callan, the Stallwells and so on, who would have been the Protestant aristocracy, who in many parts of the country were the recognised leaders of the United Irishmen movement. But he was not here. What seems to have happened here was a desperate act by local men against the tyranny of the yeomanry, the tithes that they had to pay, that the ordinary Catholics had to pay at the time to maintain the Protestant Church in Ireland, and of course the effect of the penal laws when Catholics were forbidden to vote, to own land, to education, to religion, to everything. So it seems to have been just a desperate act by Tadhg and his followers. They became aware of the ambush through a few contacts they had within the Westmeath militia. They decided to, I'd say, ambush them on the morning and hope to change them. If it had happened, it would have been a major blow against the British in West Cork, because to have one of their own, if you like, one of their own infantry divisions to transfer to the United Irishmen, or to have been beaten by people with sticks and pikes, would have been a major embarrassment to them. But in any case, unfortunately, as in the rest of the country, the 1798 rebellion here failed. But what it did do was to continue the spirit among the people down to the present, down to in 1918 to 1922, when other local men, to mention a few, like Michael Collins and Tom Barry, took up the cudgel again, and we have our own freedom today as a result of that in this part of the country anyway. That spirit of freedom was passed on to Michael Collins by, at that time, the blacksmiths who made and forged the pikes. There was a family of those Santries, west of Lisavard. They were blacksmiths in 1798. One of them took part in the rising. He made the pikes. His grandson was still in the same forge when Michael Collins went to Lisavard National School. And Michael Collins used to cross the road every day talking to this Jim Santry in the forge, and no doubt the spirit of freedom was passed on to the young Collins, and the rest is history.
Thanks very much.
Well, now Tommy Dunshaw in the middle of the village of Shannonvale, and this monument here was one of the monuments that we erected for the bicentenary of the 1798 commemoration in 1998. The stone is a local stone, and all the local committee here put all these stones together, designed and built with the cooperation of Cork County Council, this fine memorial here. The plaque itself was unveiled by the Minister for Agriculture, a local man, Mr. Joe Welch, and the description in English gives just a description of the battle itself. Here in Irish, Asquelga, Te Pirda, or is a poem by O'Scully, Cop Bail of Halig, which is the Battle of the Big Cross. O'Scully from Arfield took part in the battle in 1798 and had to flee to America afterwards. But he wrote a poem about the battle, including the names of people who took part in it, and you know, the local areas and that were involved in it. And we've included one of those verses on all the monuments that we put up. We put up 5 or 6 around the town and the local area. We included a verse in each one that referred to the local area. Instead of just doing Irish and English, we had an English description of what took place and then a verse of the poem as well. Now, the Argadine River, down here in the trees, runs through Shannonvale. The Argadine is the little silver stream. Behind it here, we're looking at a mill. It was originally founded by, I think, by the Bennett family. It goes back to the late 1700s or early 1800s. It has had a number of owners since then. The Cork Milling Company were here. It's currently owned by, I think, the Shannonvale Foods. But milling was carried out here, corn brought in from the local areas, and there was a very historic rail connection from this mill to the main line to Cork. It was pulled by horses, and when the grain was ready for shipment to Cork, there was an incline on the track, a narrow gauge railway track that ran from the mill out onto the junction out there by the Argadine River. The horses pulled the wagons out and they came back with the gradient. So it was unique for its time. I think there was one other one in the north of Ireland. They were the only two that operated in the whole Irish rail system.
Okay, well done.
Now, Tommy, the Ration Shoharish, Ishtigalar, Clucknacilty, we're back in the centre of Clonakilty town now, and we're looking at what was the old market house and town hall, which served as the civic centre for the town from 1642 to 1953. The sovereign and the burgesses sat here, as did the county councillors when the urban council was founded. The urban councillors sat here until 1953 when they moved to the new town hall over in Kent Street. It was a famous building in relation to 1798 again, because the body of Tygo Donovan Asna was dragged behind a horse from up 2 miles out the road at Shannonvale, the big cross, to here, was deposited here outside in the yard here for a number of days. The body was mutilated and was then thrown into what we now call the Croppy Hole down here at the end of town, into the bay. His relatives afterwards reclaimed the body and buried it in Ballintemple Cemetery, which is down near Ring, just about a mile east of Clonakilty. During the famine years, a starving multitude in 1847 came into town looking for food. When they couldn't get it, they pulled off the clock tower off the market house here in an act of desperation, and the one that's there now has been recently put back. This is now Asna Square in Clonakilty, and this is the finest monument to Tygo Donovan Asna that's available anywhere. The monument itself, the pedestal, was erected for the centenary of the 1798 commemoration. That was in 1898, and the actual 7-foot statue was erected in 1905, some 7 years afterwards. The inscriptions are relate to 1798 and to the other movements since, commemorate those people that died for Ireland. Tyg is, as I say, 7'3" high. The statue itself was unveiled by a very famous parish priest here, who was a champion of the landlord era and a champion of the peasants during the landlord the wars, the land wars of the 1880s. Monsignor O'Leary.
Our slogan breaks the tyrant's chains, no more we will be slaves. A memorial erected to his name in his native town of Clan must inspire those lads of a later date who beat the black and tans. Then here's to his memory, let it be for us a beacon light, to strive once more for liberty and teach us to unite. It may be near the fateful day when the glad news takes the wing, old Ireland free.
We are now standing in Shrod O'Donovan Rossa, O'Donovan Rossa, or Rossa Street in Clonakilty, and the connection between 1798 and O'Donovan Rossa was that during the unveiling of the statue in 1905 by Monsignor O'Leary, O'Donovan Rossa was one of the invited guests. Now, he was in America at the time and wasn't available, but his wife attended in this place. Now, she was a Clonakilty native, Mary Jane Irwin, who was born down in Strand House, just down at the end of Asna Square here.
And Carbery men united to make one solemn vow. We meet up at the big cross, bonfires light the dawn, and we strike with pike and pitchfork against the penal law. And the muskets fire and the cannons roar, pipes flashing one by one. The croppy against the militia boys for the pride of Erin's son. At the battle of the big cross, in the heat of the hot June sun, men bled their dead for freedom at the hands of the Saxon gun. The gallant Tygan Osna, he strode up by Riley's horse, and he said, "You will dismount, sir, in the name of the rebel cause." But one shot from Sergeant Cummins saw Tyg on the ground, and as he lay there dying, you could hear the battle sound.
Well, we're here now in Rosscarbery and we're outside the Celtic Ross, and I'd like to introduce Paddy O'Donovan.
This is the Celtic Ross Hotel, the symbol of modern Rosscarbery. Rosscarbery, of course, is the birthplace of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa. There was an ancient round tower in Rosscarbery near the Benedictine Priory, but it was demolished centuries ago. So we're delighted and very proud to have a round tower in the modern Rosscarbery, and it stands out as a symbol of the Rosscarbery of the 21st century. And we will now proceed to the birthplace of O'Donovan Rossa.
Thank you.
We're here now at the birthplace of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa. This is not the actual building. There was a cluster of houses in the background, but we're in the area. And it's an area that's due for development, and we're hoping that in the development a more impressive monument to O'Donovan Rossa will be erected. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here on the actual site of his birth in the town of Rosscarbery. O'Donovan Rossa belonged by birth to Rosscarbery. He belonged by conviction to the nation, and he became a world figure in the course of history. Here's an extract from The Great Shame by Thomas Keneally. Sundered by loss and divided by oceans of gore, the Irish of the divided states were still poignantly united in hope for Ireland. Dennis J. Downing, a Union captain, Cork-born, school friend of the most famous Cork Fenian, O'Donovan Rossa, claimed that on the night after the Battle of Fredericksburg, socializing at a campfire, he began singing the ballad, "Ireland Boys Hooray." It was a marching song of O'Donovan Rossa's radical Phoenix, national and literary clubs in Cork. Paramilitary groups of young men who had been heavily pursued by the police and were now merged with James Stephen's Irish Republican Brotherhood. The chorus spread from Irish voice to Irish voice, 6 miles along the river, and then was echoed by Irishmen in the Confederate lines on the further bank.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Miriam O'Donovan, and Miriam has helped us in publishing a book on O'Donovan and the history of the O'Donovan clan. And Miriam, where are we now?
Right, Tag, we're at Drombeg Stone Circle, which is a very important archaeological monument, not just in the context of West Cork but in Ireland as a whole. It's 3,500 years old. It's a stone circle which is important at the winter solstice, at sunset on the winter solstice, unlike Newgrange, which people will associate with sunrise at the winter solstice. And as we were talking about O'Donovan Rossa earlier and about the influence of Fenianism even as far away as the American Civil War, I was put in mind of another song associated with that time, which I'd like to sing for you.
It'll be our pleasure.
'Twas down by the glen side I met an old woman, a-plucking young nettles. She ne'er saw me coming. I listened for a while to the song she was humming. Glory, oh, glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. 'Tis 16 long years since I saw the moon beaming on brave manly forms, and their eyes were heart gleaming. I see them all now, sure, in all my daydreaming. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. Some died on the hillside, some died with a stranger, and wise men have judged that their cause was a failure. They fought for Ireland, and they never feared danger. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. I passed on my way, thanks to God that I met her. Be life long or short, sure I'll never forget her. We may have brave men, but we'll never have better. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men.
Very good.
Then we drive o'er the hill past strong big standing stones, where the clans were assembled by the chieftains of old. Then a mile further west brings a heavenly view. The bay of Landor lies in shimmering blue. He's in the harbour on a fine summer's eve. If heaven is like this, let the world stop now. Beautiful Landor, you're just beyond compare. You've shown my love and I an experience so rare. A lone thrush pours out its proud notes of joy, a chorus of love which fills the very sky. I wish the whole world could feel such tranquility as we did in Landor, that haven by the sea.
You are now videoing the Lip Parochial Hall, which was built by O'Donovans and Donovans in 1913 after a major job that they done in Rossa previous. As we came into Leap, as we know it in English, we've used in the sign for Leamy Donovan, meaning O'Donovan's Leap. You are now at O'Donovan's Leap, which is about 100 feet deep, but about 15 feet wide. And it is said that an O'Donovan in the penal times, fleeing from the English, came to this point on horseback and jumped this ravine. If he hadn't jumped this ravine, he would have been captured, and God only knows what would have happened. But by jumping this ravine, he put about a mile of a distance between himself and his followers. And this is how Leamy Donovan, or Donovan's Leap, got his name. We are still in the ravine of the O'Donovan's Leap, but we are showing a waterfall, which was a water mill driven grinding, a water driven grinding mill, and that's this. The significance of this plaque, we are still in Leamy Donovan, is of a boating accident which happened coming from Baltimore on an ill-fated Xenic, which was a fishing boat, and it went for a trip on a Sunday to Baltimore, and it caught fire. There was a large number of one family lost in it, and there was also O'Donovans lost on that ill-fated boat.
We're in Bondaghan, in the peninsula of Myres. In the background is Castle Jane. This was one of the very important O'Donovan castles in the past centuries. the background now is Raheen Castle, the most southerly of the O'Donovan castles. This castle was taken over by the Cromwellian forces in the early 1650s. They approached by sea and fired from their cannon guns on it, and the marks of the cannon shot can still be seen on the wall. It was never lived in after that raid by the Cromwellian forces. The Cromwellian forces, as far as I know, did not land. They did all the damage from their boats.
Madden, green and taurig tanhuv, the cool and old casa is kjall bean and en. Break is meal to gara, crown and gob of fada, foem megan makala is lagan I tren. An sinnach ruair an garig, meal to luag markig, is ben go dukes an malach, ag arva quid gay.
We're standing near the ruin of Sir Ivor O'Donovan's castle. According to the poet Sean O'Callaghan, who was from this area, it was built in 1251, so it's a quite old building. It was more a lookout tower than a castle. It probably was never very big. There's a massive view of the ocean from it, and Ivor was a seagoing merchant with ships of his own, doing business with the continent and with other ports around the Irish coast, presumably. His base, possibly for the shipping, was at Raheen, but we don't know that for sure. But the Raheen Castle and this were quite close to each other, maybe 3 miles apart. We haven't any solid basis for claiming that the Raheen Castle was his port, but it's extremely likely that it was. Anyway, this is what remains of it now. It is very much in ruins, but it's a magnificent site. And as a lookout, it couldn't have been better chosen. You can see from the galley head.
How far, yeah, the galley head?
From the galley head on the east, right around to the stags on the western side.
Right.
In the background now is Loch Clogher. We're about half a mile from the remnants of Ivor O'Donovan's castle. And it is said and believed by some, presumably, that Sir Ivor returns here once every 7 years in his enchanted ship.
Times hear you speak of Erin's Isle. Her lofty scenes, her valleys green, her mountains rude and wild. They say it is a lovely land wherein a prince might dwell. Oh, why did you abandon it? The reason to me tell. Oh son, I loved my native land with energy and pride, till the blight came over all my crops, my sheep and cattle died. My rent and taxes were to pay, I could not then redeem. And that's the cruel reason why I left old Skibbereen. Oh well, I do remember that bleak December day, when the landlord and the bailiff came to drive us all away.
How are you? Great, how are you?
Fine. Now, I have an opportunity to introduce Daniel O'Donovan, the O'Donovan.
Right.
Daniel, why are you known as the O'Donovan?
Because I'm chief of Clan Cahill, and chiefs of the name of any clan in Ireland prefix their names with the definite article. So I am the O'Donovan. Oh. Otherwise Dan, and otherwise just O'Donovan, if someone wants to be, that's it. Seems strange that people use just the surname, but that was a traditional formal greeting to any chief. Right. So that roughly is how that arises. Not all that desperately old, I think only about 150 years or so when the chiefs first, I would have been O'Donovan, or my ancestors would simply O'Donovan, and other members of the clan would have been Donovan, but that changed over the course of history. So I suppose the chief thought he'd better distinguish himself somehow and called himself the O'Donovan, or the O'Brien, or whatever it might be. Yeah. So that roughly is that. Okay. But although the power of the chiefs vanished in after the Battle of Kinsale, so there is no temporal power, you might say, and none of the old ancestral lands, which were held by the clan anyway, not by an individual. I suppose it's fair to say that now it has been, the succession has been by heredity since about the 17th century. Okay. And in my case, the last de facto chief would probably have been in the 17th century. And after that, it has been, as I say, the succession has been hereditary.
Hereditary, okay. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Dan, you got some letters of interest for us. Yeah,
well, we go round and have a look
at them.
All right, we'll do that.
That's all we need to. Very good.
But I won't put you all through those, because it will take you 5 years to read them.
This is the translation of the Old Irish.
Well, I think possibly, I'm embarrassed to quote my own words, but perhaps to introduce Dr. John, I can just read out the foreword that I wrote to the recent book published and written by Miriam O'Donovan and editors, the O'Donovan History, which was commissioned specially for the Millennium Clan gathering, which starts in a few days' time. Now, in the foreword, I put briefly, and it is brief, the O'Donovan genealogy is almost uniquely well documented thanks to the researches of Dr. John O'Donovan, 1806 to 1861, one of Ireland's most distinguished antiquarians. It's perhaps surprising then that an historical outline of the clan and the activities and achievements of members of it has not been attempted until now, as far as I know. So here it is, and I'm confident that all who read it will feel that the editor, Miriam O'Donovan, and her fellow contributors have added greatly to their understanding and appreciation of the clan and its history. Now, the reason that the genealogy of O'Donovans is almost uniquely well documented, that Dr. John O'Donovan, who, well, he's one of our most outstanding figures of Irish intellectual history during the 19th century. He was particularly renowned for his translation from the original Irish into English. He did not agree with previous volumes that had been published, because he, in his researches, and he was a most thorough researcher, as I'll show you in a minute, found many mistakes which did not tie up with the English cross-reference to the Irish. So his great work was to issue this edition of the Annals of the Four Masters in 1847, which was essentially published, by Hodges and Smith of Grafton Street, Dublin, in 1848, as a private venture. Dr. John never became wealthy as a result of this monumental work, but he was proud just that he should have done the work, and indeed he was subsequently known in scholastic circles as the Fifth Master, these volumes being the Annals of the Four Masters, a history of, well, the annals of the times. You couldn't call it a full history, but it is various anecdotes about the old Gaelic Ireland put together. Now, his interest to my ancestors, and hence to me, that he was originally, I mean, in his origins, he was the son of a poor farmer from County Kilkenny, worked briefly in the Irish Public Record Office before joining the new established Ordnance Survey in 1830. And he spent 12 years walking the length and breadth of Ireland, investigating activities and collecting place names, and he did a huge amount of correction. His work stands without parallel, really, I think, in the history of Gaelic Ireland. And now, to get back to the reason that it is, apart from the fact, obviously, his own name was O'Donovan, and he was anxious to establish accurately his relationship to Clan Cahill and my direct ancestors. And he starts off on the 22nd of March, 1841, to my great-great-uncle, Morgan William O'Donovan, who lived at a house called Montpellier in the city of Cork. Dear Sir, Reverend Sir, you will much oblige me if you will let me have a pedigree of your branch of the family of O'Donovan. I want it to illustrate some passages in the Annals of the Four Masters, a work of great importance. That correspondence, I sadly, these have been transcribed from the original letters, which I have in the house, but I couldn't get them out. I hustled through, but I was looking at them the other day, but I'm afraid they've all been locked up in various boxes. Anyway, I've sadly not got the replies that my great-great-uncle gave to these letters, but this correspondence lasted from 1841 until 1861, 20 years, and I can tell you he asked some very leading questions of my great-great-uncle. Each letter, well, I won't, it'll be too long to quote from them, but he asks very leading questions. At one time he implies that he wants to establish that my great-great-uncle was truly the head of the clan, and he finally convinced himself after 20 years writing that he was. And the reason I say that the pedigree of my family is uniquely well documented is that in his work, the Annals of the Four Masters, he published an appendix which was the pedigree of O'Donovan. One, he was interested in it from his own personal point of view, and secondly, he uses it really as a characteristic genealogy of one of the most ancient families in the country. And that goes on, my mathematics isn't very good, but it starts on page 2430 and finishes on page 2498, so that's about 64 years worth, which is a fairly monumental appendix, if you like, or full footnote to this really monumental work, which finally established his distinction. But these letters show that his research was bar none in concentration and digging up all the information, and he must have been quite satisfied with my great-great-uncle's replies, because each letter, and they wrote to each other twice during a week, spread over,
much
as I
like
say,
we'd
40 years.
pick up the phone.
Sure, exactly. But of course, it's rather better to do it in writing. Obviously.
Well, it's much more helpful today anyway.
Indeed, and you know, he was quite hard. He said, "My dear sir, I wish you to prove that you aren't," and then he goes on, and that lasts for 40 years. In his, he must have appreciated his work, I mean, my great-great-uncle's replies fairly early on, because in 1843 he had this painting of Castle Donovan. He commissioned it by the artist, and I'm ashamed to say that I cannot exactly read the writing, but at any rate, that was Castle Donovan as it was in 1843, and you can see the crack there, which meant that all that side of the castle finally fell, I think it was in 1940. And this part, all here, is actually held up by the mullion on that window, in other words, a stone pillar. And this part has all now vanished, and there are some large rocks sitting around the front, which we can see today, showing what it now looks like. But in any case, so that is the basis, really, of our having the principal event of the clan gathering at Castle Donovan, when the Minister for Arts, Heritage, Gaeltacht and the Islands, Sheila de Valera, TD, is coming to unveil a plaque just commemorating that the gathering, the first as far as we know, certainly in modern times, was held there. And I was up there yesterday, in fact, making quite sure the stone sat squarely on the wall, which it does. So that really is about the outline of why Dr. John O'Donovan is of particular interest, not only to Gaelic Ireland and all scholars in the matter of tracing ancestry, but his research, I hope and trust, will never be overturned, and I very much doubt that it will, because for a man to spend 20 years corresponding and then finally to put it in his great work argues tremendous scholarship and all the rest of it.
And I believe he didn't have any male offspring to lead on his own.
Well, wait a minute now. Yes, he had. How many sons did he have? But they all. He had 6 sons, I think it is right. One of whom was Edmund O'Donovan, who became. Well, he was a newspaper correspondent, and he finally became something called the Khan of Merv. Merv is in Persia. And he happened to be there at a time when the local chiefs were fighting. That's something that's not unique to Persia either, I may say. It happened here in Ireland. But there was a row going on, and normally there were three rulers, and they couldn't resolve their problems, so they voted this total stranger to become effectively king of their country. So that was one of Dr. John's sons. I haven't looked them up, I'm afraid, and I can't tell you how many he had. But certainly his line then with the sons eventually, because their offspring, I think, did die out, and the last close relative of his was one Patrick O'Donovan, who used to write in the 1980s in the Observer, and he was
and he's now died out.
Yeah,
as
yes.
Yeah.
As far as I wouldn't want particularly to be quoted on that,
okay.
Because I'm speaking off the cuff. And,
very good. Well,
you know, it might.
But that was the impression we were given from reading part of the accounts here.
Yes, I mean, I have read that, and in a way it's slightly sad that Patricia Boyne was, when she wrote that excellent short biography, she was not aware of those letters.
That's a shame.
Yeah. When she refers to the to the Four Masters. But there it is, as I say. What did I say? 34 pages. It's quite a good footnote to get, isn't it? But that really has been, that means, and that's why I said in the foreword to this new book, that the